really happy to be here. There's a lot that's been going on. Simmons, you may know as a brand for over 60 years and as a trusted survey for the media and consumer industry. And just recently, well, I would say the closing was mid-December. Simmons and Hitwise were a part of Consumer Insights and owned by Experian Marketing Services and Experian, the large credit bureau. They were sold to Symphony Technology Group, or STG, and that deal closed in mid-December. So it's kind of nice to be here and reintroduce ourselves. And STG, it's fortunately wanted to stand Simmons up on its own as its own business again, which I'm very proud to be the GM and CRO. And we're in the middle of doing that. We still don't have finance and we still don't have some of our own email, but we are continuing to do our research. And the nice part about this standing up with STG is they have sister companies. One is Connexity, which will absorb Hitwise, and another one called Symphony Advanced Media, which you may have seen in the press recently. They collect video viewing basically across all devices at a very granular level. And my presentation today is actually on a measurement science philosophy for bringing the best of methodology and the best of technology together. And so excited to have a sister company like Symphony Advanced Media. I'll talk a little bit about the product integration we're starting in earnest now, but by the time that transaction actually happened and this presentation, I didn't change a lot of the content, but you feel free to ask me questions about that. And you'll see how the measurement science philosophy is actually going to drive the integration between video viewership and what we do now with Simmons. So what I'm going to talk about in the next 20-25 minutes or so, I hope, are what is measurement science? It's my definition of it, and that definition which has been a philosophy underpinning the improvements that we've been making and the enhancements we've been making with Simmons Research. Why do we take that approach and how? And I'll give a couple of examples. One is from Custom, it's a large sports broadcaster, and the other one is something called AudienceView, which is a product, and I'm not here to give a commercial about what we do. It was something that we did with Hitwise, which actually was just a way to show off. Well, it wasn't just a way to show off. We wanted to create it because a lot of our clients had been asking, but using some of our data integration prowess, we brought together a huge Hitwise database that had about 10 million respondents in the online behavior, desktop and mobile in the United States, with the richness of the Simmons database. So I'll talk about that as an example. And then finally, how we use measurement science. So let me start off with the definition. And my definition of measurement science, not unlike others in the past year, going to conferences and speaking about this and realizing, I think I ran into Pete Doe at an event and he said something similar. And then I was emailing with Bill Engel, and he has a consumer science definition. So they're not dissimilar. And I think a lot of us are moving around the same definition and coalescing around the same vision for measurement. I define it as the juxtaposition of measurement technology. That could be passive or massive databases that are collected through some passive technology. It's very granular collection in many cases, not unlike Symphony Advanced Media. And measurement methodology. That would be choosing the appropriate sample size, appropriate survey methodology. We write a lot of papers and share them with our colleagues at APOR, for example. Calibration, weighting, and data validation. And that's my definition of measurement science. That's the approach that we take. I could go back a little ways, and my history in measurement science goes back to my career after being a failed teacher at Ohio State. I decided to go into the private sector, and the first thing I was asked to do as a media researcher was to validate the PPM, a passive portable meter that Arbitron was testing. And I realized then that not just having a great data collection technology was enough to give you great measurement for media. You needed to have great methodology, you needed to have great sampling, you needed to understand what the definition of viewing was or listening. And so what I didn't know was that I was actually always working in a paradigm around measurement science, is that have a great technology, but also have a great methodology and make sure you bring those two together. The goals in consumer research and media research around measurement science are to minimize burden on the respondent. They're our core natural resource. They're very important to us. Anything we ask them, we use that data, or we don't ask them to participate. We try to maximize passive data collection. Maximizing that means if I can see the behavior, if it's revealed in some way, I don't want to have to ask them if I can trust that revealed behavior to line it up with the stated attitude and brand preference data that I have. And then I'm going to use the best techniques to model or calibrate and bring that data together and integrate that data together, usually using behavioral linkages, attitudinal linkages, so going beyond demographics and other standard linkages that are used. Often what happens in market research is a client approaches you and you think, okay, I've got to do a survey. What I want us to do is stop and say, actually, a lot of this data exists. It just exists in a lot of different forms. Let's see what's already out there and let's see what we can bring together, and then only ask the additional questions that we need to. So we do that a lot Jackie runs custom research for us. We may have an auxiliary survey that we run that's very small. We may run it against respondents who've said they would be recontacted, but then we minimize the sample burden and we maximize the data that we already have collected or that's been passively collected. One example is linked imputation, and this is a data integration technique. Many of these, they've existed for a while. You've heard of data fusions and data integrations, been refined and advanced with innovations over the years. It really depends on whether or not you want what you want of the outcome of the data integration. Do you want to preserve currency levels? Is it a television integration? Is it a print media integration? If you want to preserve currency levels, you're really restricted by what type of a data integration you can do. If it's the type of data that you're integrating, that's a whole different ballgame. Do I have a lot of data, but it's low quality, non-probabilistic, a natural data stream that was out there, and I'm trying to integrate it with something else? Then you can use different techniques. We've done a little bit of everything in Simmons. We have a measurement science team that's small but mighty, that's gotten very good at doing this. And one of the things we've done recently is develop something called linked imputation. And the key differentiator here is that it's scalable. So we took, as I mentioned at the beginning, massive database of online behavior, mobile and desktop, that was sitting in the Hitwise database, which at the time, under the Experian umbrella, I could wrap my arms around more closely. And I also happen to have the NCS, or the National Consumer Survey, that's Simmons Research core product. And I wanted to bring those two together and maintain the depth and breadth of the Hitwise data, but also have the 60,000 data points, the attitudinal, the brand preference, the media consumption, the cross-media consumption of the NCS. Okay. So linked imputation was actually the best outcome. I didn't need to preserve any particular media currency, and I didn't have any limitations based on the types of data. I did have a large Hitwise database that did not get sourced from the same types of high quality probability sampling as NCS, but I used a fingerprinting methodology that allowed me to bring these two together. And I'll show you an example of that and how we did it. Okay, so the cornerstone, though, is the NCS database. So for those of you not familiar with it, it's annually about 25,000 respondents, demographics, lifestyles, shopping, brands, media behavior. As I said, about 60,000 data points, about 800 brands. So rich, deep data set, and done in a very high quality probabilistic manner. Okay, so the nice thing about this is it's fully projectable, and anything you link to it will gain a lot of high quality information because of that. Okay. The other data source could be, in the case I just mentioned, it could have been Hitwise, it could be ComScore, it could be anything. It could be first-party data, which is often transactional and lacks maybe some of the depth and demographics and attitudinal and brand preference, because it's your first-party data. You're only going to collect so much data. It's our job to kind of help you. It could be third-party data. It could be natural data that's out there, a credit card database, for example, many other databases. And we can bring those two together using either a linked imputation or, depending on the type of integration that you want, we'll use a different technique. What essentially happens then is on your left would be something like the NCS. So you've got shopping, attitudinal, some media consumption, travel, everything, all kinds of categories. And that database, though, is typically smaller than what you're going to have on the right-hand side, which is usually a passively collected cross-device media consumption, highly granular. You saw in a couple of presentations before mine where it's getting trickier and trickier to follow what people are doing because they're on different devices. Like the tubular presentation showed, billions of views. So you're getting really, really big data, and the linkage is probably going to be a small number to many. So one to many type of a linkage, which in some standard data integrations and fusions is not really allowed because you're trying to preserve a currency. So you need to do something called split weighting or other types of techniques. What we've done since I joined Consumer Insights about 18 months ago, and what we started to do was build a back end to allow us to continue to do these types of data integrations, these types of linked imputations that we felt the media and consumer industry really needed, and using a measurement science approach. So now our phase one, this is when we initially reach out to respondents in a high quality probabilistic way. They fill out a small questionnaire, a small survey that allows us to be in the field continuously. So they say, sure, I'll tell you a few things. It's about a 4-page questionnaire. It gives us universe estimates of key weighting targets and key trends in the consumer and media industry. We're in the field all the time. So if they said, yes, you can recontact me for another survey or to be impaneled on a Connect panel or in the Symphony Advanced Media panel, which we're going to talk about in a second, then they've just spoken to me and said yes, and so recontacting them within a few days or a month is a higher probability of participation than 6 months or 12 months. Okay, that establishment survey then is a pool of high quality known respondents that can either continue on and fill out the National Consumer Survey, which is what I've been talking about as our core product, or they can join the Connect panel, which actually becomes really a cross-platform, granular, passive video viewing calibration panel. That's one of the panels that we're now integrating with Symphony Advanced Media. Or you can create what I call low-frequency panels. So for types of content, like over-the-top content that changes frequently, there's hundreds of new scripted shows and there's a renaissance of television. There is a lot of high-quality content out there. The problem is it changes very quickly in terms of what lineup is available. So a survey that comes out every 6 months or every 12 months or even changes quarterly is just not fast enough. So people have said to us that yes, they will participate in what I call low-frequency panels because we're going to ask them questions several times a year. A high-frequency panel, in my definition, would be something like a Symphony Advanced Media panel or something where you've got a passive meter picking up everything you're doing every day. Okay? And we can also link then the data through strong behavioral linkages to, it could be Hitwise, it could be any other database, a third-party database, or first-party databases, or partner databases, where they already collect specialized data, let's say on gamers or a certain segment of the population or sports enthusiasts, and we link that data using behavioral linkage data. Okay, so not only did we build an infrastructure for improving the way we could eventually do data integrations and linked imputations and measurement science, if you will, but we also started to do what I call research on research. So this isn't an advertisement for how we do things. This is how we've done research to learn how we can do it better. So people have said when I gave this paper at the Print and Digital Research Forum in London and then at the MPA in New York, and I had been asked, why would you show things that you're not good at a conference? Well, it's because we need to all learn when we can use stated versus revealed types of responses as behavioral linkage variables. So we looked at how well does behavioral imputation perform, is recall more reliable when activities are more frequent, and does revealed behavior align with recalled behavior? And what we did was actually, this giant graph is going to show up. I don't expect you to read that, but the main point is that if what people said they did online matched what we saw from the same panel, it's a single source panel because they filled out the NCS and then they were given a meter for desktop and mobile behavior, so we saw what they did on apps and we saw what they did on their desktop. If there was a true correspondence, all those bars would be the same. And as you can see, most of those bars are not even close to each other. So self-reported and observed, done in this really nicely controlled experiment, shows that the behaviors are not matching. Very rare type of experiment. The only other one that we saw Google did where they wanted to be able to expand out what they were measuring in terms of television by moving away from small panels that use set-top meters. So they were using recall methodologies in several different countries, looked at the data, and the results were that there were no scalable television measurement solutions that used stated behavior that did not contaminate the control group for advertising effectiveness. So it was millions of dollars to tell them they needed to do a new approach. So we were able to do this type of experiment as well. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't pay attention to what people are telling us as a behavioral linkage variable, because in fact, if you looked at the behaviors that were most common, they had the most the highest reach values, Google, Facebook, some email, and Amazon, for example. The agree rate between the percent that reported that they visited and then we saw were actually between 70 and 95%. So there's certain behaviors that are important. And it's not just where you went that's important, it's what you do online. So I might have a lot of the same overall intensity as someone who's demographically my twin, but I'm online gambling all day and they're actually doing some work, okay? So it's what you're doing online that's important. So we have to ask those types of questions, and that's what comes out in the NCS as well as where you're actually going. We also looked at whether or not relative frequency had any impact on how self-report and revealed lined up. And this kind of makes sense that more frequently search, or whether you're shopping online or looking at weather applications or looking at finance applications, you are going to be more likely to report them, okay? The limitations of looking at it this way are that this is just relative frequency across a particular desktop visit. Could also be a mobile app. They were very similar results. But it's not just frequency, it's also intensity and the type of usage. So what we want to do next is disaggregate by the type of user overall, their demos, whether they're intense or not, whether they use mobile more than desktop, et cetera. So there's lots of disaggregations to find out where we're actually getting very, very good behavioral data that can then be used as behavioral linkages, which make imputation and data integration much more accurate so that we can use a measurement science approach to bringing databases together. The linked imputation that we put together with Hitwise, we had a lot of beta testers to help us with validation. It's very difficult to do validation across something like that because there's nothing to compare it to, okay? So what we did was we looked at the imputed data and then our survey data and did linked imputation return the same pattern. So we looked at male, female, 18 to 24, children at home, we did a whole bunch of other variables. But what you see is that across different types of publishers, whether they were sports sites, shopping sites, et cetera, the skew from male or female or 18 to 24 or having children at home, things like that, all line up quite nicely. The other validation that's a lot more important is that since introducing it and launching it in 4 different markets around the world, including the United States, I haven't gotten a lot of phone calls saying the data doesn't make any sense, but phone calls none of us want to get, I'm sure. So there's a lot of ground truthing that's been going on in that validation for that methodology. Okay, so how do we put this to use? Check I know I'm the last speaker, so the last thing you want is me to keep going on and on and on. The NCS serves as the foundation for all of this. Because we know exactly how it's been collected, we know it's probabilistic in nature, we know it's very high quality, and we're rebuilding the back end. It's also being audited and being accredited by the Media Ratings Council to ensure that we're doing things in all the right ways. It has a lot of information, okay? A lot of consumer information, a lot of media consumption and goods and services consumption, brand affinity, brand switching behavior. That's the basis that we can add all kinds of information to any other database. So you may have, your target may be someone who consumes a lot of streaming video, okay? The problem is that best customer might actually have a lot of different attitudes and behaviors that you're not seeing unless you can link it to an attitudinal and brand preference and media consumption database. Okay, so you see the person on the left is looking for a deal all the time. They're going to test things really, really carefully. The person on the right just wants to have the coolest looking phone, and they're more of an impulse buyer, don't care about the price. So while it looks like they're big streaming users, they're very different people in terms of their attitudes. You'd probably approach them differently, you'd market to them differently, you'd reach them across different media differently. So there's no one best customer, right? And I think a lot of us know that, and our clients know that. So you've got to be able to bring an attitudinal and a media consumption database to bear on this. What did we do with AudienceView, which was the sort of front end of the linked imputation? We brought NCS together with the gigantic online behavior database that we had. So you could go very deep into the types of data of websites that you had. You then created a database through linked imputation that was all the 60,000 data points that we had in NCS, all the 10 million panelists in Hitwise, and put it on the front end so that you could tell stories in real time. So the quarterly data that came out of NCS was updated quarterly, and then the panel data for Hitwise is updated weekly, and you had this giant database in front of you on the cloud, and you could create a custom segment and say, here's my online and offline consumers, here's what they were doing, here's their brand preferences. This, not only were they big streaming video watchers, but they also, are never going to switch their coffee brands because they're really loyal to X brand or Y brand, and they have this many children, and et cetera. So all of that was available to you in AudienceView, and a lot of our advertising clients love this because they can create these segments now on the fly. How did we actually create that linked imputation? I wanted to take a step back and not go into a lot of the math detail here, but we have 160 online behaviors that we collect through the survey, and we also can see through the Hitwise panelists. Those create a unique signature or a unique fingerprint that we continue to refine the math around defining that uniqueness. And then we find matching panelists. So it is a one to many. Every panelist becomes helps create a unique fingerprint that goes to one of the Hitwise panelists. And that's how we create the linked imputation, which brings the survey profile data to the online panel members. Some of the examples of how we use this, in a custom perspective, we had a major sports broadcaster who said, look, I want to find other opportunities to advertise to the non-traditional sports profile. So, it's not just sort of males that are watching sports, but who else? What other non-traditional advertising opportunities are there? This was put together when the Patriots were supposed to be going to the Super Bowl. It didn't work out that way, but so millennials were one of the targets that they were interested in. And what we were able to do is, and by the way, so this client knows that the NCS is pretty deep, but didn't collect a lot of other sports, not just the top sort of sports that everybody watches. So we actually collected a custom survey, and then also different types of viewing. So it was co-viewing and not just viewing on your own. And what you end up with is, those are the different sports. And actually, I think it builds oops, go back. The different sports, how they index across millennials. Okay. And then the brand the brands that these folks are most have an affinity with, and you see a lot of very familiar logos there. So now the ad sales team could approach those brands in a different way and say, actually, millennials are engaged with these types of sports because they're a big sports broadcaster. And this has been a repeated custom study that we've been doing for many years. They also wanted to target the female sports enthusiast. So what we looked at was what type of purchasing behavior is captured in the NCS that is now linked to this first-party data that came from the extra survey that we did. And of course, you could see that the sports fans are 33% more likely to be the sole decision maker across shopping. And what type of shopping do they do? Where do they index the highest? And again, now there's a different marketing avenue for you to get to those people by the same sports broadcaster. So they're finding different advertising opportunities for their ad sales team. And finally, I wanted to end up with just a quick conversation about how we'll be using a lot of the measurement science integration with Symphony Advanced Media. This is actually a slide that's got a lot of details, like an eye chart, so I'm just going to talk over it. But really, what Symphony Advanced Media does is collect passively through an application, through audio matching and some other technology. It's a great technology. It's a great example of measurement technology being brought together with measurement methodology. So what we'll do is bring our high-quality sampling, our attitudinal and behavioral and brand data to Symphony Advanced Media. And what they'll bring to us is much improved video measurement. We do some of this now in our Simmons Connect panel, but it's not as high quality, and some of it is based on recall. And if you've ever tried to measure media based on recall, you know you're going to miss a lot. I got 15 years of finding this out, so I know that. And we're pretty excited about this data integration. And again, it's going to be driven by a measurement science philosophy where we'll try to mix the best of methodology with the best of technology. And we hope that in the coming months, you'll start to see some of the fruits of that. So let me just wrap up with a couple of summary statements. I believe that someone's going to burst through there in a second. Do you set this up? She's trying to kill me. The measurement science is critical to the future of consumer research and media research. You saw a few presentations where people are bringing in. You can just leave those there. It's critical to the future of consumer and media research. It's not just big data, it's not just matching data to big databases like Axiom or even Experian, but actually taking the very high quality stuff that you have to ask people about, attitudinal data, brand preference data, doing that correctly and then integrating it properly. We also wanted to make sure to build a solid data core that we could use for data integration. So if you had enough behavioral linkage variables and you knew how to use them, what attitudinal type of variables could you use for this linkage as well? So we sort of built a nice repository of methodologies that we use for data integrations. And finally, I'm a big proponent of doing more research on research. So what are we going to learn? And sometimes you learn that some of the things that you're using just don't work all that well. Certainly, that type of research is something that we want to do. We continue to present papers at APOR and conferences like this. And if you want to see there's a written paper that summarized a lot of those graphs that I'd be happy to share with you. And it sort of shows what we do, warts and all, but also shows what we're learning and hopefully making better. And that's it for me. So thanks very much.